Hey guys, welcome back. We are going through the Summer of Ecclesiastes, and man, we are deep in it. We are covering the background of what Solomon went through in his life, and then we're going to hop into how to understand the book itself. Now, as you can look down through the playlist here, you're going to see a lot of headlines that kind of give you an idea of where we're going. I decided to do that so that way you guys could kind of peruse your way through. If there's certain lessons you're like, I don't feel the need to update myself on that one. However, there are going to be things that are said in each of these that are really essential to understanding the book of Ecclesiastes in a full sense. The stuff that is a little less essential, I've tried to push off to a side note. I'm including it in the playlist. Most likely when you watch this, you'll see it. And what those are there for is to give you a little further information. Those are the ones that are optional. They'll typically spring off of some side comment that I made. And so we're going to talk about Abishag and how all that played in. There's some really weird stuff when you get into Solomon. So if you are interested in those specific topics, hop on over. There's a whole playlist of side notes that is going to kind of help you understand some of the details a little more. There's a lot of weird stuff in the Bible, and my rule of thumb is this. If you are looking at content in the Bible and the original audience didn't even blink twice over it, it probably means it was perfectly normal, and there was just some context that we're missing because we live thousands of years removed. However, there are times where, in Jesus' parable or otherwise, he will intentionally say things that will get people to go, excuse me, what? Okay, that is meant to elicit that response. But there are things like at the start of Solomon's reign where his brother comes up and asks for a wife and gets put to death. And you're like, why? Okay, side notes are going to deal with some of that type of content to kind of give you a background. It's not essential to understand. The original audience wouldn't have had a problem with it, but again, we've lost so much context since then. Now, where we left off last time, we were talking about Absalom being sent into exile. Again, David didn't necessarily do his job. We'll address that in a sec. And Absalom will come back from exile, and he will slowly start working his way into the good graces of the people of the kingdom. Basically, it says he'll steal the hearts of the people of the kingdom. And that's what Absalom is doing. And he'll force his hand. He'll force his way back into David's presence. And then in so doing, he then takes over the kingdom, or at least tries. David flees. There's a lot of really cool intrigue if you're into that story. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And ultimately, Absalom's revolt is put down. But in the process, Absalom does fulfill one of those prophecies that God makes about the concubines in the light of the sun. What that is, and you'll see this a little bit more with the Adonijah and Abishag thing, this is a way for him to say, these consorts of the king are now mine, which is a royal thing. And so he's basically saying, yes, I have the right to rule, and I'm dominating David's thing. And so that's what that's saying. That's why that would have been something that you would do. You all know what happened to Absalom. He had long flowing hair. He gets it caught up in a tree. The revolt is put down through clever tactics. David says he doesn't want him killed, but his commanders are like, yeah, right. And so Absalom is put down anyway. David's next son goes through some things as well. And the long story short, this is why I said the whole Bathsheba situation is really what brings Solomon to the throne. It's kind of uncanny because what you've got going on here is Solomon would not exist, for one, if the Bathsheba thing didn't happen, at least in the way that it came about. But Amnon should have been in line for the throne. Absalom should have been in line for the throne. Both of them are now removed from the picture. You're about to see Adonijah get removed from the picture. There's a few other sons that get removed from the picture. And so David is systematically losing several of his sons in the process of just the end of his reign as people kind of jockey for power, get vengeance, other things like that. So Amnon is dead by the as you look here, Kileab is a second son that he had. He just vanishes. We don't know quite what happened to him. Absalom is killed in the revolution. And it seems, based on what we know, David's next line would be Adonijah. And spoiler alert, he doesn't make it either. And so that's just kind of a little bit. Now, he had a ton of sons. You look down through the lists. There were a lot of sons, and most of them either vanished from the picture or are dead, apparently. And so again, it's not a warm and fuzzy story, to put it mildly. And so these were apparently skipped over or something happened. There's also a son, Nathan. So he does something, and he's still in the line. So his children maybe are the ones that are traced all the way down through Luke, through to Jesus in the book of Luke. We're not sure. There's some different interpretations on that one. It's outside the purview of where we're going here. Solomon, though, is the next king, and he's the one that is traced down through Joseph, according to Matthew. And so there's, again, a lot more we could say about that. There's some fascinating study that has been done in those lines. I like this quote by Sue Sandage. She, in her study here of David in the Valley of the Shadow of the Middle Age, sorry, I skipped the quote. She says this: this brings the number of David's sons who are mentioned by name in the Bible to 19. The number does not include David's daughters, whose name the Bible does not give, except for Tamar. If the reader has trouble keeping track of all the children, they're in good company, because David also seemed to keep track of them as well. And so David has a lot of kids, and Solomon is the one that God chooses to be king. And we'll talk about that. That's a big part of Ecclesiastes, is this idea that God's sovereignty, God's free will to make decisions, is going to step in, and it's going to circumvent all these plans of man. Because again, Absalom had designs on the throne, and Adonijah had designs on the throne, and other people did, and they all failed in some way or another. And that's how Solomon comes to the throne, is God basically pushing situations. Now, as we get to the end of David's life, there's a few other things that happen in David's life. He is very committed to God. He's going to bring the ark to Jerusalem. There's going to be a few stops along the way, as you guys know. It ends up sitting there for a long, long time. You can read about that at your leisure. He'll build a large household. He'll have a large family. And these are things that are going to spur David to start looking toward the idea of a temple. And this is where the idea for the temple is going to come. Now, this, again, is going to play very crucially into Solomon's life, because, again, that temple is the thing Solomon is known for. It's Solomon's temple. But really, David is the one who's going to lay a lot of the groundwork for that situation. David will defeat the Philistines, so there's a lot going on in David's life from a military standpoint. And the way this works, when David wants to build the temple, God will look at him and say, "You are a bloody man. You are a man of war. I'm not going to have you build the temple." And so David says, "All right." And so he lays out all the supplies, and his son, who's not a man of war, will be the one who builds the temple. Again, we've already kind of covered this. He desires to build the temple, but God says no for those reasons, but he promises to build David a house. And so that's how this all works out. So I explain all this about the life of David, and again, you can go read Brainy Pixel's Chronicles of Faith to kind of get some different perspectives on David's life. This is going to be a lot of what is ingrained in Solomon. He is the wisest man who ever lived. His scripture, it is scripture. It's inspired by God. But again, it's coming from these experiences. It's coming from the life that David lived, that Solomon lived, that he witnessed. And so a lot of these situations are going to make more sense in light of what he experienced in his life. Just to kind of fly through the rest of this, David is going to do some things that are foolish. Again, he orders a census. The Bathsheba thing. There's a few things like that you look at and you go, yeah, these weren't really the right choices for David to be making. But again, overall, David's reign was a godly reign. It was free of idolatry. Those are the earmarks that make David the good king. It's not saying that every decision he made was good. But one of the things that's fascinating is he lays up the plans, he lays up the supplies, the gold. He really gets everything ready so that when he dies and it comes time for Solomon to build the temple, these supplies are ready to go. And all Solomon has to do is figure out the construction. So David really lays that out. He has a heart for God, and that plays out in all of these areas of his life. Now, this is where it gets kind of weird, because as David is about to die, he can no longer get warmth, so he has a concubine of sorts by the name of Abishag, and she's this maiden. It makes a point to say he never slept with her, but she would lie next to him and keep him warm. That's it. There was no weird sex stuff going on. This wasn't like some kinky weird thing. Like, this is just her sleeping next to him to keep him warm. He's old. Okay? But in so doing, this is going to actually lead into a solution Solomon comes up with for taking care of his brother. David is going to die in 970. Solomon's going to take over. But before he dies, Solomon has to go through some pretty interesting transitions. And that's where we'll cover next, because it gets a little chaotic. And so we've spent a little bit more time kind of covering David's life. But I want you to see this because it's not a good transition. And so tune in next time. We'll cover a little bit more here of Solomon. And yeah, it gets pretty rough from here on out.